This is now us entering into the sixth Friday night, the sixth Shabbat, since October 7th. And I imagine that fatigue is setting in, news fatigue. Do we want to hear about this anymore? How many times did we hear about the war in Ukraine before we said, I'm no longer interested in this sad story, seeing these images of rubble and people displaced from homes and children killed, etc.? Well, we're seeing the same thing here, of course, in our homeland in Israel. And hopefully, this war won't go on the way the one between Russia and Ukraine is enduring. God willing, it will end quickly, efficiently, effectively. The goals are very different. In terms of morality and the laws of war, the goals are entirely different. But let's think for a moment about the hostages, because while we may be fatigued of the story, just think about those individual people of all ages, and they're not aware perhaps of the day and that more than 40 days have passed since they were taken captive. Let's make them our reason for staying engaged in their lives, in their story, and not turning away. One of the things that we see is that initially we had the world support. World leaders actually flew into Israel, European leaders, President Biden, people were flying in to show their support. And then, of course, they go back home and that support wavers and wanes over time. Well, think about what's going on in their camps, in their circles. All of them are elected officials and therefore relying on their electorate to keep them elected, to keep them in power. And now they're going home and having pressures from different groups, constituents, particularly Muslim constituents in their own countries. I'm thinking about Emmanuel Macron from France, president of France, who presumably is getting enormous pressure from his large and vocal Muslim population and others around the world as well. Thinking about Pope Francis, Pope Francis has not been unequivocal in his statements. He's been very much in the camp of leaders who are saying all of this is terrible, it should all end. Well, it should all end, but morality demands something clearer than that. But I think the reality is that even the Pope is a politician in a sense, that he needs another bill, essentially, if I put it in congressional terms, to pass, and he'll need that support in the future. What does it mean in the case of Pope Francis? It means that soon he's going to announce an enormous Vatican-based worldwide climate initiative. And one thing we know is that he's going to need and want the support of the Arab neighbors, the Arab nations. So he's probably, most likely, this is a supposition, a guess, being very careful so that when he needs them on that, he won't have lost their support because of his support in this case. I don't like it. You don't like it. None of us like when our politicians get their hands dirty, particularly when it's a world religious leader like the Pope. And remember, I'm only giving you a guess as to what his motivation is. I don't think it's just neutrality for the sake of neutrality. I think it's also an agenda, and the agenda is how can I do such and such effective in the future if I lose my partners and my allies. Going back to the imperative, let's remember why we initially were supportive. One was we were aware of the facts on the ground. All of us had a very clear understanding through imagery and word and narrative of what happened on the morning of October 7th in Israel. Let's remember that. As I said to you often, and in the beginning particularly, was people tend to forget the outset of war. What caused it? What was the first bullet fired, essentially? Think back to the wars in history. We have no idea how they began. We just know how they endured and what came out of them. So that was the first thing to remain steadfast in, our understanding of the precipitating event, what happened initially. The second was our understanding of Israel's obligation as called a parental unit, a government that has the primary and enduring responsibility of protecting its citizens. And that's what Israel went in to do. And Israel made a commitment to us, to the world, to its citizens, that it would do so in a way that is in keeping with international law and in keeping with Jewish Torah-based morality. And Torah-based morality when it comes to war is very, very clear. So lastly, let's remind ourselves, maybe tonight when we light candles, of those people who can't light candles, can't sit at their Shabbat tables, whether they're secular Jews or not, whether they're Thai workers who are in Israel, whether they're Arabs who live in Israel, whatever it is on this Shabbat, let's raise our Kiddush cup to them, to their freedom, God willing, soon. And let's hope that this terrible, terrible drama ends soon, swiftly, and well. Shabbat Shalom.